Earl Simmons, known worldwide as DMX, died on April 9, 2021, with less than $50,000 to his name, despite selling 74 million albums and once being worth $15 million. His abandoned mansion in Westchester County stood as a haunting symbol of his fall from grace, broken windows, weeds overtaking the driveway, and a recording studio that would never again echo with his distinctive bark. But the story of how one of hip-hop's most powerful voices ended up broke, alone, and addicted reveals a tragedy that began decades before his final overdose. Born December 18, 1970, in Mount Vernon, New York, Earl's nightmare began immediately. His mother Arnett was only 19, struggling with mental health issues as a Jehovah's Witness. His biological father, Joe Barker, abandoned the family when Earl was a baby, creating an abandonment wound that would haunt him forever. Growing up in Yonkers, Earl faced daily abuse, beaten with extension cords and belts, locked in his room without food or water, while neighbors who witnessed the abuse did nothing to help. By age 5, Earl was stealing food to survive. But the defining moment that would destroy his entire life came at 14, when a trusted older neighborhood figure offered him what he claimed was marijuana. The joint was laced with crack cocaine meth, a deliberate act to create addiction in a vulnerable child. From that single moment, Earl Simmons became enslaved to one of the most addictive substances on earth. Every subsequent relapse, every broken promise to his children, every career setback traced back to this calculated act of cruelty against a traumatized teenager. Think about the magnitude of this betrayal. A 14-year-old kid already dealing with abuse and abandonment was deliberately given one of the most destructive drugs in existence by someone he trusted like a father figure. Earl never had a fair chance at a normal life after that day. This wasn't addiction through experimentation or peer pressure. This was calculated victimization of a child who desperately needed protection and guidance. Despite his addiction, Earl discovered an extraordinary talent for rap. Performing on Yonkers streets, his raw emotional power stopped passers-by in their tracks. Taking the name DMX from the Oberheim DMX drum machine, also meaning Dark Man X, he channeled his pain into music that felt like autobiography set to beats. His lyrics weren't entertainment, they were survival stories from America's forgotten underclass. Rough Riders Entertainment recognized his potential and signed him, though Earl appeared to recording sessions high and sometimes disappeared for days. Everything changed with 1998's It's Dark and Hell is Hot, which debuted at number 1 and sold over 250,000 copies in its first week, eventually moving 4 million units. 8 months later, Flesh of My Flesh, Blood of My Blood also hit number 1, making DMX the first rapper to achieve back-to-back number 1 debuts in the same year. He was making millions, performing for massive crowds, and becoming hip-hop royalty. At his absolute peak, experts estimated DMX was worth between $15 million. He was selling out arenas, his albums were going platinum, and his distinctive growling delivery had made him one of the most recognizable voices in music. Songs like Rough Riders Anthem, Party Up, but success couldn't heal trauma that began at 14. Even at his peak earning power, Earl spent $5,000, $10,000 weekly on cocaine, over $500,000 annually just on drugs. His dealer became one of the neighborhood's wealthiest residents thanks to Earl's habit. The rapper would buy so much cocaine he'd share it with strangers on the street, sometimes purchasing enough to supply entire neighborhoods. In 1999, Earl married Earl Simmons, who hoped marriage and family would motivate him to get clean. They had 4 children together: Xavier 1992, Sean 2002, Tacoma 1999, and Praise 2005. When sober, Earl was a devoted father who played games, helped with homework and told stories. His children adored him during these lucid moments, when the real Earl would emerge from behind the addiction. But when high, he became unrecognizable, missing birthdays, school plays, sometimes unable to recognize his own children. The transformation was devastating for his family to witness. Teixeira would later describe the heartbreak of watching the man she loved disappear behind his addiction, replaced by someone who was physically present but emotionally absent. His addiction fueled infidelity that devastated his family. Earl fathered 15 children with 9 different women, including daughters with Monique Wayne, Desiree Lindstrom, and Yadira Borrego, plus twin boys with Patricia Trecho and several others whose mothers remained unnamed. Child support payments exceeded $100,000 annually, creating crushing financial pressure regardless of his work schedule. Each of these relationships represented another broken promise, another family torn apart by his inability to control his addiction. His children grew up scattered across the country, many barely knowing their father or their half-siblings. Some would see him for a few days when he was touring in their city, then he would disappear for months. The pattern repeated endlessly, promises made and broken, hope followed by disappointment. Despite massive album sales, Earl's money management was disastrous. He bought expensive cars and forgot where he parked them. His Westchester County mansion cost $50,000 monthly in mortgage and maintenance. He gave away tens of thousands to friends and family who asked for help, unable to say no to anyone who approached him for money. Combined with his drug expenses and child support obligations, Earl was spending more than he earned even at career highs. The mansion itself became a symbol of his impaired judgment. He purchased the 7-bedroom, 5-bathroom estate sitting on 3 acres of beautiful land as his family's sanctuary. It included a recording studio where he planned to work on music, a large playroom for his children, and enough space for all his kids to stay when they visited. The kitchen was custom designed for family meals, and the backyard featured playground equipment he'd specifically chosen for his children. But the house also became a place where his worst relapses occurred. Police were called multiple times for domestic disturbances, drug-related incidents, and welfare checks. Emergency medical services responded at least 3 times for overdoses before Earl eventually lost the property. What was supposed to be a safe haven became another location where his children witnessed their father's destruction. By 2010, Earl's financial situation was completely out of control. He owed the IRS $1.7 million in unpaid taxes. He was behind on child support to multiple women. His mortgage company threatened foreclosure. Credit card companies sued for hundreds of thousands in unpaid bills. The man who had earned millions was drowning in debt because addiction had made it impossible for him to manage money responsibly. In 2013, he filed for bankruptcy, revealing over $1.2 million in debts against less than $50,000 in assets. The bankruptcy documents, which are public records, painted a devastating picture of financial collapse. The man once worth over $10 million was officially broke, with nothing to show for years of platinum albums and sold-out concerts except unpaid bills and broken promises. His beloved mansion became the most heartbreaking symbol of his fall. When Earl couldn't make payments, the bank foreclosed and took the house away. For years afterward, neighbors reported seeing him sitting in his car outside the abandoned property, sometimes for hours, staring at what used to be his home. The house deteriorated, mosh broken windows, leaking roof, weeds reclaiming the driveway, while Earl lived in small apartments, owing millions. Between 1998 and 2017, Earl was arrested over 30 times for drug possession, driving under the influence, reckless driving, tax evasion, and probation violations. Each arrest cost thousands in legal fees while further damaging his reputation and limiting his earning potential. Concert promoters became reluctant to book him because they couldn't rely on him to show up clean and ready to perform. The tax evasion case was particularly serious because the government claimed Earl had deliberately hidden money to avoid paying taxes. In 2017, he was sentenced to 1 year in federal prison and ordered to repay $1.7 million. The judge accused him of living expensively while refusing to pay taxes, but those close to Earl knew the truth. He wasn't hiding money because he had no money to hide. The addiction had consumed everything. Ironically, prison became one of the best things that happened to Earl in years. Without access to cocaine, his body and mind began healing for the first time in decades. He read books, exercised regularly, and spent time reflecting on his life and the choices that had brought him to rock bottom. The forced sobriety gave him clarity he hadn't experienced since he was a teenager. Released in early 2019, he appeared healthier and more focused than he'd been in years. His eyes were clear, his speech was coherent, and he talked about the future with genuine hope and enthusiasm. He immediately started working on new music and planning a comeback tour. In interviews, he called prison a blessing in disguise, and made heartfelt commitments to staying clean and being a better father to his children. His fans were excited to see this version of DMX diverging the version that had been buried under decades of addiction. He seemed to have finally found the strength to overcome the demons that had controlled his life since he was 14 years old. For a brief moment, it appeared that Earl Simmons might finally get the chance to live the life he deserved. But addiction is a disease that never truly disappears, and the stress of rebuilding his career while managing ongoing financial problems proved overwhelming. By late 2020, people close to him noticed warning signs that he was struggling again, missing scheduled appearances, erratic behavior, and rumors that he had started using drugs again. The pressure of trying to restart his career at age 50, while still owing millions of dollars, created an impossible situation. The COVID-19 pandemic made everything worse by eliminating live music events, cutting off his primary income source just when he needed it most. Earl was desperate to make money to support his children and pay his debts, but there were no opportunities to perform or tour. The isolation and financial pressure of the pandemic, combined with his ongoing personal struggles, pushed him back toward the drugs that had controlled his life for so long. In his final months, the man who had once owned luxury cars and mansions was receiving government assistance for basic living expenses. He was using food stamps to buy groceries, a humiliating reality for someone who had once been worth millions. He had contacted several high-end rehab facilities before his final overdose, but most required upfront payments of $50,000, $100,000 that he couldn't afford. The few programs willing to work with him had waiting lists of several months. On April 2, 2021, Earl was at his home in White Plains, New York, when disaster struck. He suffered a massive drug overdose involving a combination of cocaine, fentanyl, and other substances. The medical examiner would later describe the concentration of drugs in his system as incompatible with life, meaning his death was essentially inevitable once he consumed that amount. The presence of fentanyl was particularly tragic because it's now present in much of the illegal cocaine supply, and it's 50 times more powerful than heroin. Earl may not have even known that the cocaine he was using contained fentanyl, which made an already deadly drug exponentially more dangerous. This combination shut down his respiratory and cardiovascular systems simultaneously. When Earl's heart stopped, his brain was deprived of oxygen for several crucial minutes before paramedics arrived, and were able to restart his heart. But the damage was already done. The lack of oxygen had caused severe irreversible brain damage. He was rushed to White Plains Hospital, where doctors put him on life support machines to keep his body alive, while they assessed the extent of the injury. Earl spent 7 days unconscious in the hospital's intensive care unit on life support. This became the first time many of his 15 children had ever been in the same room together. Ex-wife Tashera flew in from Arizona, where she had been living since their divorce. Even his mother, despite their difficult relationship throughout his life, came to the hospital to say goodbye to her son. The scene in that hospital room was simultaneously beautiful and heartbreaking. Here was a family that had been scattered and divided by years of addiction and dysfunction, finally coming together because their patriarch was dying. His children, ranging from young adults to small children, took turns sitting by his bedside and talking to him, even though he couldn't respond. They shared memories, expressed their love, and tried to make peace with the complicated relationship they'd had with their father. Doctors were honest with the family from the beginning about Earl's condition. The brain damage was extensive and irreversible. He was only alive because machines were breathing for him and keeping his heart beating. There was no realistic hope that he would ever wake up or recover any meaningful brain function. The family faced the impossible decision that no one should ever have to make. After days of prayer, consultation with medical experts, and painful family discussions, they made the decision to remove Earl from life support. They wanted to let him die with dignity, surrounded by the people who loved him despite all the pain his addiction had caused. On April 9, 2021, at 6:24 p.m., Earl Simmons took his last breath surrounded by his children and family members. He was 50 years old. The man who had survived decades of addiction, multiple overdoses, legal troubles and financial ruin, finally succumbed to the disease that had controlled his life since he was a teenager. News of DMX's death spread quickly through social media and news outlets around the world. Tributes poured in from fellow musicians, celebrities, and millions of fans who had been moved by his music and inspired by his struggles. But underneath all the public mourning lay uncomfortable truths about what really killed Earl, and whether his death could have been prevented. The immediate cause of death was listed as cocaine-induced heart attack, but the real causes ran much deeper than that. Earl had died from a combination of childhood trauma that was never properly treated, an addiction that started when he was deliberately victimized at 14, a healthcare system that failed to provide adequate mental health support, and an entertainment industry that profited from his pain while doing little to help him heal. When Earl died, despite selling over 74 million records worldwide and being one of the most recognizable names in hip-hop history, his estate was valued at less than $1 million. But his debts, including unpaid child support, tax obligations, and other bills, were estimated to be much higher than his assets. This meant that Earl's 15 children inherited essentially nothing from their father, except the ongoing burden of his unpaid obligations. The music industry's exploitation became obvious immediately after Earl's death. Within 24 hours, his streaming consumption increased over 1,000%. Record labels that had dropped him or refused to work with him during his struggles suddenly started promoting his catalog and announcing tribute projects. Rough Riders Entertainment, which had made an estimated $100 million from Earl's music over the years, released statements calling him family, while having done very little to help him during his final struggling years. In the week after his death, Earl's songs were played over 75 million times on Spotify alone, generating hundreds of thousands in revenue for the record labels that own his music rights. Meanwhile, his children started GoFundMe campaigns for basic expenses like college tuition and medical bills, because they received essentially nothing from their father's estate. The abandoned mansion that had once symbolized Earl's success was eventually sold at a foreclosure auction for less than $800,000, a fraction of the over $2.5 million he had paid for it. The new owners had to spend an additional $500,000 just to make it livable again, because it had been abandoned and deteriorating for so long. Local news stations would sometimes film stories about the empty house, showing how this symbol of success had become a monument to failure and lost dreams. Earl's story exposes the failure of multiple systems that were supposed to protect and support vulnerable people. The medical system treated his symptoms during numerous emergency room visits for overdoses, but rarely recommended comprehensive addiction treatment or mental health counseling. Between 2016 and 2021, he was treated for drug overdoses at least 6 times, but each time he was released without follow-up care or connection to addiction specialists. The legal system consistently treated his drug use as a crime to be punished rather than a medical condition that needed intensive treatment. Court-ordered treatments were often inadequate for someone with his level of addiction and trauma. Instead of receiving compassionate care that addressed the root causes of his problems, he was more likely to be arrested, imprisoned, and stigmatized. The entertainment industry knew about Earl's problems, but continued profiting from his work without providing adequate support. Record label executives have since admitted that everyone knew DMX was in serious trouble, but nobody wanted to be the one to stop the money machine. They paid for short-term rehab programs that lasted 30 to 90 days, but these were more about getting him clean enough to work again, rather than addressing his deep psychological problems. The most tragic aspect of Earl's death was how preventable it was. At multiple points throughout his life, different decisions by different people could have changed his trajectory completely. If that trusted adult hadn't deliberately given drugs to a 14-year-old boy, if Earl had received proper trauma therapy instead of just short-term drug rehabilitation, if the music industry had prioritized his health over their productivity, if the legal system had focused on treatment instead of punishment, Earl might still be alive today. His story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about our priorities as a society, and our responsibility to take care of each other. It shows how childhood trauma, when left untreated, can destroy a person's entire life. It demonstrates how the entertainment industry often exploits vulnerable people for profit without providing adequate support for their mental health and well-being. Earl Simmons deserved better than the life he lived, and the death he died. His 15 children deserved to have their father present and healthy throughout their lives. His fans deserved to see him thrive instead of watching him struggle publicly for decades. And our society deserves to learn from his tragedy, so that we can prevent other talented, troubled individuals from following the same devastating path. The streaming revenue from Earl's catalog in the year after his death exceeded $15 million, money going primarily to industry stakeholders, rather than his children or addiction treatment programs, highlighting the ongoing exploitation of his legacy even after death. Earl's story has become a case study in addiction medicine programs and business schools, teaching about the complex factors that contribute to substance abuse, and how the entertainment industry's focus on profit over people contributes to these tragedies. The true measure of Earl's legacy will be whether his death leads to meaningful changes in how we address addiction, trauma, and mental health in our society. If his story can help prevent even one family from experiencing the pain that his children have endured, then perhaps some meaning can be found in his tragic death. Earl's abandoned mansion has been renovated and sold to a new family, but it remains a permanent reminder of what addiction cost him. Community organizations in Yonkers have started programs in his memory focusing on at-risk youth and families dealing with addiction, addressing the root causes that contributed to his struggles. That would be the greatest tribute to DMX's memory, ensuring his tragic death serves a purpose in making the world better for those who come after him. Earl Simmons may be gone, but the lessons from his life and death can still help save others if we're willing to listen,
learn, and create the desperately needed changes in how we support our most vulnerable people.